Our next speaker is Jelle Verheij. He studied modern history at the University of Amsterdam and Leiden and is specialized in the late 19th century and the historical geography of the eastern provinces of the Ottoman Empire. He's the editor of the Social Relations in Ottoman Diyarbakir, 1870 to 1915, together with Joost Jonkerdin, which was recently published, I think, in Turkish as well from Bilgi University. And he'll be talking about the Beys of Müküs, Moks, or Bahçesaray between 1830 and 1900. Jelle Verheij,
evet,
please.
hepinize hoş geldiniz. Ben İngilizce değil, Türkçe konuşacağım. Belki de haberiniz yoktur, umarım var.
Welcome everyone. I am going to speak in Turkish instead of in English. So, talking about Moks in about 15 minutes is very difficult. How am I going to change the slides, by the way? Okay. Now, the region we're talking about, sorry, what should I press? Moks is to be found in the southern part of Van, which is a well-defined area. It is made up of 7 rivers, and it is actually, it gets connected around Moks, where you have the village, and there are mountain ranges which are higher than 3,000 meters. So, of course, this influences the history. I call it Moks, by the way. Moks, and its new name given to it in 1960s is Bahçesaray. Kurdish call it Möksi. There's also Müküs. Armenians call it Müküs. So this is the how the Ottomans called it. I call it Moks. Anyway, now this part is very naturally influenced by this, of course. And during the Roman times, even then, even in the 4th century BC, it had the same name. It was called Mokswen in one resource, in one source. So it had this name even then. Okay, now my subject will be about the administrators of this area. For hundreds of years, these people managed this area very independently, and of course, written sources are a rare occurrence for this area. Looking at the Ottoman archives, we see only a few files about Moks or about Müküs. Why? The Ottoman administration was non-present there until 1850s. Yes, some foreign travelers went by, but they did not leave much behind. And Armenian scholars, etc., did not leave much neither behind. So to come to this region, still you have to go by a Karapet, which is an Armenian name, Karapet tunnel, up above 3,000 meters. It was concrete. Well, it was like this until 5 years ago, and only 3 years ago they poured concrete. As you see, it looks like a sea star, this region. It's quite, green rivers all around, and you don't get this anywhere. So Bahçesaray itself is really unique. This is why it's called Bahçesaray. It's very green. Literally translated, it means the green palace. It was completely of Armenian settlers. And there were some traces of Assyrians, but I don't have time to talk to you about this. Armenian princes governed the region for hundreds of years. Vaspuragan dynasty or kingdom had this part of it, and then after the Mongolian conquests it fell down, but probably they went on to govern the region for another couple of years. Which century was this? Let me see. In 1169, the resources are talking about an Armenian prince, a resource that dates back, says about 1200s. This was the case. Şerefname is another important document. It says that these beys, these governors, came from Hınıs, from the Erzurum region. Of course, not much information on that. We don't know if this is true or not. But one possibility is that those beys were maybe the Armenian princes who were converted to Islam, but it's really difficult to say if this was really the case. There are many churches left, more than 20 actually. It's worth seeing. They are not well known at all. It's really difficult to get there, some of them, and they're beautiful. Well, 19th century, the region. The red ones are Muslim, most of them Kurdish. Red ones are Armenian, but there are also martyrs. No, there are provinces. Some are also Arab provinces. The yellow ones are Arab provinces particularly. And these beys, when Ottoman reign took over, it was in the 1500s, they had the status of ocaklık, which means the Ottoman Empire did not really meddle with their business. No Ottoman governor was sent there. Of course, they weren't paying any taxes. Actually, they weren't doing anything. It was just an independent area until 19th century. And what sort of a place was this? Was this a place with no culture at all? No, this wasn't the case. Like the first Kırmançı, the first Kurdish grammar, was written by someone from Moks, for example, Eremaksi. A scholar wrote it. From the monastery, there were 2 madrasas. Over this part, you see the Arvas. And Arvas was where the madrasa could be found. It was a religious school. And then in Moks Center there was one. It taught Farsi and Arabic, etc. Now, coming to the base. At the beginning of the 19th century, this status almost collapsed because there were many beys, and it was all children of the previous beys, but it was like in a way divided up. But one sheikh brought them all together at the beginning of 1800s. He was called the Şeyhi Bey, which was something really interesting because Müküs, Moks, then moved out of its borders for the first time ever. It expanded its borders really. So it's a very interesting time period. Han Mahmud's brother, many friends here talked about Nohan Mahmud, so I'll talk about him in a bit. So Şeyhi Bey first invaded the northern part. And by the way, it's not a very important area, but these tribes are of course important, but they are mostly pastoral nomads in the region, but not for the Moks region because of the geography. Look, there's Bahçesaray, Moks. The migration routes went through Moks, not as high, but down below, which of course influences the base or the sheikhs there. So they had an important place. Okay, I'll skip this. I already talked about this. Now, this Şeyhi Bey, first of all, conquered the northern part, called Pagvas. It was the Pagvas castle where he settled it, and then a very unfortunate thing happened to him. He had invaded Gevaş as well under the influence of the Hakkari Beys. Şeyhi Bey fell victim to a dangerous woman who was the unmarried ruler of Gevaş, Saadet Hanım, and he was killed. So she asked him to marry, so he went, but this was actually a lie. Anyway, Then one of his younger brothers, Mahmud, replaces him. This Mahmud, known as Han Mahmud, would become one of the most important Kurdish leaders of the region. He establishes himself permanently outside Moks. Between 1829 and 31, he fights against the Russians, and this Hoshap castle afterwards falls into the hands of Han Mahmud, and the emirate of Moks now extends from Bitlis until the border with Iran. Of course, it wasn't an easy time. There was the Nizip War continuing, 39, with the Ali Pasha from Egypt, which went really wrong. They lost. And then on the east, the Kurdish Beys had their golden period. Was it an opportunity? Was it a reaction? Whatever you call it, but otherwise, Ottomans did not have anything to say in the eastern part for those 20 years. Then with the Han Mahmud's conquest, there is a region which is Karkar, and there are some Bahçesaray people there. They said 150 years ago, 160 years ago, they came to that region. So possibly they came with Han Mahmud. It might be the case that settlement took place like that. The people of Moks were resettled somehow there. Okay, because of time, I have to really be brief. What has happened between the Ottomans and the Kurdish Beys? Of course, some conflict started to happen, and our Han Mahmud expanded his influence after Nizip and comes really close to Van, actually, and there's a period of time when they call him the governor of Van, actually. He's like Kaymakam, and Ottomans listen to him. In Abdülcevaz as well, one of his brothers also gets settled down. So this is the golden period, as I say. In 7-8 years, Moks governs Van, not other way around. So this cannot be found in official history. This is something forgotten today, but this is very clear in the Western works. There was a French writing. I couldn't find it in French original, unfortunately. I found it in German. This person spoke to Han Mahmud. And what does it say here? Let me see. In Europe, he was permitted, and this was the guy whom everyone avoids. And this person did not want to go to Kurdistan before saying hello to such a reverable person. So he was that important that people had to stop by. Pierre Victorien Lotti, who is an archaeologist, he describes Han Mahmud. He says he was soft and had a very soft and lovely voice, etc. But he had a very harsh way of governance. He had the iron fist in a way. This was, Moks was full of fear, actually. This sort of a thing it had about himself. Or, for example, people asked for protection when they were going by. And then people said, it doesn't matter if you are traveling alone or with 100 people, but without the command of or the order of Han Mahmud, we cannot protect anyone, it was said. So we don't know about the governing structure, but it's a very feudal structure which distributed siblings all around, which wasn't very sustainable, really. And the end of Han Mahmud happened in 1840, and Bedirhan Bey, Batuhan Bedirhan Bey, and Nurullah Bey from Hakkari, their regions were conquered, and for the first time Ottoman structure was established, and they captured Han Abdal, who was exiled to Rhodos. In July, Bedirhan surrendered, and in September Han Mahmud was also exiled. So what has happened on exile? These beys were exiled with their children. Some started to come back, others remained. For example, during Pahvaz, they're talking about a Kulihan Bey who started to govern this region. He was the relative of Van Mahmud. Some of them remained and settled in Van. Another branch went to Erçek, etc. So, in short, what has happened in Moks? There was a gap, first of all. And the sheikhs started playing an important role, particularly the Arvas ones, Arvas sheikhs, because tribes do not play such an important role there. However, the Ottomans, in one way or another, could not maintain themselves, sustain themselves. They had to work with the local powers. So what do we see? Towards the end of the 19th century, we see Muhtula Bey, Murtula, according to some sources. He is assigned as the Bey of Moks, and he is an active leader in the region. Okay, I have to tell you very briefly about the Beys and the Armenians. There are many different opinions. Now, Han Mahmud's thousands, I'm guessing, there are thousands of descendants, relatives in Van. So it's like a special relationship with Armenians in one way or another. So they were always nice to Armenians, they say. But it's not very convincing, is it? So, yes, Muhtula Bey gave a protection order at some point, which was important in 96, but it wasn't all that we had. We see that even his own relatives were also being banished. And in Ahtamar, Catholicos kept writing reports constantly about Muslimized Armenians, which seems like it wasn't all a bed of roses. And the same thing holds true for the First World War as well. Muhtula tried to protect, but it didn't work quite. Because when the Russians came, they themselves ran away. And I talked to the descendants of those sheikhs there, and they told me that there was a conflict, and the Arvas monastery was burnt down. And the church there was burnt down to... Well, Armenians burnt down the Muslim part, the Muslims burnt down the church part, etc. So, when I was talking there, they took a recess. And because of this sort of new mentality amongst the Kurds nowadays, he looked at me and said, you know what, actually we started this subject. We first burnt their places down, and then they burnt our monasteries down, he said. So, in brief, this is the history of Moks.